MS it's never a part of the plan. We're not going to account for it. We're moving forward, and if MS decides to show up, it's going to show up, and that's fine. But that's not it. We're not stopping our plans because MS is trying to get in the way.
All right, well, welcome back to another episode of the Broom Tree Podcast. This is actually episode 13, lucky number 13, but we are excited. I have some dear friends of ours. We have a special guests, plural, today. We have a couple with us, the church family. Everybody give it up in the chat for the church family. We're so excited to have you guys with us today. Our church has crossed paths, 2022, I think?
That sounds
early
right.
2022,
Yeah.
late 21, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Our church and your church kind of collided through a long series of events that we won't go into this episode, but our paths crossed, and we kind of in the same room, but in totally different worlds for a couple years, I think.
Yeah.
We didn't really start, I guess, getting to know each other super well until earlier this year. That's not entirely true. I know that, Kat, you and my wife go to a Bible study together, so I
Yes.
think that you guys have known each other longer than you and me have known each other, Alex.
Yeah.
But for our audience, some of them, this is their first time meeting you guys, so tell them kind of your names, a little bit about yourselves, how you guys met, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kat.
Well, I'm Catherine.
Oh, I'm Alex.
All right. Well, anyways. So we got married in 2021.
Okay.
So we've been together, married for 2.5 years. We got married the day after our 2-year dating anniversary. So we've been together for about 4.5 years. We met it was 2019. You just graduated college.
Yep.
And I had just moved to the Nashville area. And we met on Bumble, which was
Ayo.
exciting.
Shout out to Bumble.
Yeah.
Unpaid sponsorship, but if they would like to sponsor us,
Exactly.
let us
We're a
do it.
success story. So, so we met on Bumble. But what was great about us meeting on Bumble was our roommates at the time actually knew each other,
Yep.
which we didn't know when we matched.
Okay.
But we found out later on. So my friend and roommate at the time, we were looking through my Bumble matches, and she was like, oh, like she went to Belmont at the time, and he had just graduated from Belmont, which is a university in Nashville. And we were looking through my Bumble matches, and she was like, oh, I know this guy. And so we started talking about him, and we had talked for like 2 seconds. Like, it was not a deep conversation.
Okay.
It was like a, hey.
How are you? Yeah.
We hadn't talked in like 2 days. And so I reached back out and I said, hey, this is really random, but my roommate said she knows you. And that's actually what started us
Okay.
talking more and then actually meeting, because I felt safe, because I was like, okay, I know someone who
Yeah,
knows
yeah,
this
yeah.
guy. Like, he's
Exactly.
He's
not
not a
gonna murder
creeper.
me.
Yeah.
Dating apps can be a little iffy in
Right.
that sense.
But then you heard, oh, wait, I know this guy. He was the president of my campus ministry. It's like, oh, okay, well, maybe he's not the worst
Yeah, I was like,
person
okay,
in the
so
world.
Yeah.
he is actually a Christian.
Not some
like-
chronic drug dealer or something.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right.
for sure. What was y'all's first date?
Our first date was Cilantro, which is a Mexican restaurant
Okay.
kind of downtown. I think that was like our first official date. We had hung out a couple of times, and then we went to Cheekwood once,
Okay.
which is like a garden that you like walk around
Right.
at. And yeah, so I think Cilantro is what we said was our first real date.
Yes.
That we were like, okay, like this is a date.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's get this thing rolling.
And we cannot, for the life of us, remember when that was either.
Right,
Like, we've
okay.
tried to go back and like find our first date, like what day it was. and
Yeah.
Calendars, texts.
We have
Nothing.
no idea
Nothing.
when that was. We
Nothing.
just remember that it happened,
Yep.
Right.
but don't remember when.
Yep.
Okay.
So couldn't tell you that.
When you guys started dating, was it like, because I think about when me and Amanda started dating, were y'all quick to be like, I'll tell you how we were, and then you can tell me
Yeah,
what,
yeah.
I guess, my sense what I'm trying to say. So when we started dating, I immediately started telling everyone Amanda was my girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
That was not the case at all. But I didn't want my friends hitting on her.
Yeah.
So I was introducing her as my girlfriend. And then after we left the movie, I was working in the movie theater. We left, and she was like, you know, we're not boyfriend and girlfriend. And I was like, oh, yeah, for sure. And it would still go around telling her. So did you guys have that, like, because you guys met, I guess, would that be early 20s you guys met? Was it like instant, like after date one, you're like, all right, we're in this? Or was it like, I don't know about this like, how did your early dating days unfold?
Yeah, so I think it was less like I'm not really sure about this person and more about I'd just gotten out of a relationship when I met Kat.
Ah, okay.
And so apparently I had never told her that until like
Okay.
a few
It
like
was after we were dating. He
Yeah.
was like, "Oh, by the way, I waited 4 months to ask you to be my girlfriend because I had met you like 2 weeks after I had just gotten broken up with for this like serious
Yeah.
relationship."
Okay.
But he never told me that. So for 4 months, I was like, I don't know if he's gonna like ever ask me to like actually be his girlfriend. Like we're going on dates, but like
okay.
it's not anything more. And all of my friends were actually telling me like, you should cut this guy off. Like he's
Okay.
never gonna
Yeah,
ask
yeah.
you to be his
Okay.
girlfriend. Like
Okay.
just cut it. And I was like, I'm gonna give him like one more week. I kept telling my friends that. I was like, I'm gonna give him one more week. Like he's gonna ask me to
Yeah.
be his girlfriend. And I had actually never been in a serious relationship before Alex. Like I'd
Okay.
never had a boyfriend before. So I was just like, it's gonna happen. Like it'll be fine. And everyone was
Yeah.
like, no. But
Yeah.
then he did. So
And you
we
go,
made it work.
and you guys, and now, so from your first date to your wedding day, you said was what, about 2 years? Is that how long?
Almost to the day. It was like one day off.
Okay,
yeah.
so how long into your dating, Alex, were you like, this is the one? Like, here we go. I'm gonna marry this one. Like
probably a year in.
a year in. Okay.
Yeah. Every story that I have about major milestones with Kat and I have been, they're like the stupidest stories in the world. And it always happened in Kroger. It was just me in
Wow,
Kroger.
okay.
I would be walking through an aisle. I remember one time it was when I realized that I wanted to date her. It was like
Okay.
the moment. And I was walking through the aisles and I was like, oh, let's go to the Halloween. I'm going to go to the Halloween aisle, just like get something for Kat. Seems kind of
Yeah.
fun. And then I was like, why am I doing this? Why do I feel like I should do this? I'm like, I think I actually want to date this girl.
Yeah.
Like, this is kind of
Yeah,
real.
yeah.
The same thing happened. I mean, it wasn't Halloween, but similar thing with getting married was I was
Yeah.
walking through an aisle in Kroger and I was like, oh, like, I think I should get Kat. She would love this ice cream. I'm going to get this ice cream. And I'm like,
How thoughtful, though.
yeah, but I'm like, why? Like that? Why is that the first thing that pops in my head? And I'm like, wait, like she's actually super important to me.
Yeah.
Like this is like, I feel like I want her in my life.
Yeah.
And so it just immediately transformed from there, where it was like, oh yeah, that was the point where I was like, yep,
Yeah.
marriage, that sounds great.
Kind of diving right into our story now that our audience has gotten to know you guys a little bit. What role did your faith play in your younger years? And you guys can answer these individually, and then kind of how that looked when your worlds collided in 2020.
Yeah.
19.
yeah. Yeah, so that question's always so interesting to me, especially when it comes to Alex and I, because we were raised just completely different from each
Okay.
other, but we both did grow up in church.
Okay.
And so I love talking about this just because it's so interesting always to see how, a relationship with God plays into different people's lives. So for me, I grew up going to church every Sunday with my grandparents, and
Okay.
I went in between living with my parents and living with my grandparents just throughout growing up. Like every weekend I was at my grandparents', weekdays I was with my parents. And so I grew up going to church, but my home life was just crazy. Like my parents are alcoholics, drug addicts. There was 4 of
okay.
us, so I grew up very, very poor. There were multiple times where we were homeless, and even through high school, I was just living with friends, and my one consistent was church
Yeah.
and my relationship with God. And so people, when I tell them about my past that I've had, I've always questioned, like, how did you get out of that? Like, how are you
Yeah.
who you are today and where you're at today? And honestly, it all just points back to my relationship with God. Like, if I didn't have that and didn't have the foundation of growing up in church and hearing these things and having that relationship with God where he was a parent figure to me, like I
Yeah.
really wouldn't be where I am today. And some of my siblings aren't because they didn't spend the time in church like I did. And so
Yeah.
it really was so foundational to me, just who I am as a person, getting to grow up in church. And luckily, like, I didn't experience a bad side of that. I know some people do,
Right.
and it's really unfortunate. But for me, it really was a home, and it was a place I knew was consistent when nothing else outside of that really was.
Yeah, and I think before we dive into yours, Alex, I think one of the things that you said there that jumps out to me is like, I think we only hear the trauma stories of
Yeah.
like what the church did to me, not what the church did for me. And I think there are a lot of people listening who will relate to that of like, the church didn't really burn me like that. Like they were actually
Yeah.
a place of refuge for me. I think one thing I would ask though, that I think some people listening might be wondering, with all of the traumatic things that you shared that you kind of had when you were a kid, Was there ever a time in your walk with God where maybe there was anger or confusion or resentment of like, there are people who don't go to church who have a better life than me, and I'm trying to serve you, and my life still looks like this? Like, was there ever any of that for you when you were younger?
Yeah, I think it was more like the older I got, whenever I was in like the high school age, and I was kind of, that's when I feel like I really started to notice like, oh, how I have been raised and how I'm living isn't normal. Like
Oh,
having,
so you're saying like you just didn't know any
I just
different?
didn't like,
Yeah.
yeah, it was just, my life has always just been, it's just what it was.
Yeah.
And so, and I was so engulfed in like, this is just how my family is. Like, I didn't really think anything of it until I was in high school. And then I started to notice like, oh, like people have like stable parents. Like not everyone's parents fight all the time and drink all the time. And people have lived in the same house their whole life. And I was like, that's kind of crazy to think about.
Oh.
And that's when I kind of started being like, well, why is that? Why are they so different? Then why is their life so much better than mine? And I'm here serving every single Wednesday, every single Sunday.
Yeah.
And I started serving in the church from a young age. And I'm like, well, when is it going to be my turn to have good
No,
things?
for sure. Yeah.
When is it going to be my turn to, get to see the fruit of all of the stuff that I've been, doing my whole life? Whenever these other people, they just randomly show up once a month, maybe on a Wednesday night to youth group, and they have the perfect life from what I can see. And so it was really frustrating when I was getting a little bit older and kind of creating my own faith. And that's when I think it shifted from, you grow up in church, it's your grandparents' faith, it's just what you're told every Wednesday, every Sunday, to, oh, this is like my relationship with God. This is like, just because I'm doing all these good things doesn't necessarily mean there's always going to be good things that happen to me. Like there's going to be bad stuff, but that's just part of life. And I'm so lucky to have a good relationship with God, where when those hard things happen, I can turn back to him, because he's not ever abandoned me. And I've seen that my entire life. My one consistent has always been God and my relationship with God. So even in hard times, I can always turn back to him. Even if I do get upset sometimes, I think it's normal in every relationship. Like we get mad at each other, and you just work through it. And when you know that you have that like unconditional love, things work out.
Yeah. And you touched, our pastor shared that even this past weekend about like that relationship brings that intimacy, and that intimacy sometimes brings that confrontation. And I think that's so healthy for us to do sometimes, to where I don't think we're evaluating enough if we don't have days where we're like, God, why is my life if on a bad day you're still like, oh, everything works out. Like I think at some point it's good to have that intimacy with the Lord, to be like, this kind of sucks right now.
Right.
But then like you said, making that internal, like on your own faith, and being like, it does suck, but you said like, you're still my constant, like you're still my consistent. So even if it sucks, I'd rather it suck with you than it's going to suck either way. So I might as well deal with it with you,
exactly.
know?
Have some hope in it.
Yeah. So, and then what about you, Alex? What was that like for you?
So similar to Kat, completely raised in the church, from the moment I was very young till I graduated high school. And in college, very much, I was always the introverted kid, but I was also always the kid that the teachers got mad at, because I was the one that would ask these weird questions of being like, well, can I be in the military and be a Christian, because God says you can't murder? How does that all work together? And they'd be like, why are you asking these questions? You're in 6th grade. Like, you should know about this. Like,
so you seem pretty like analytical, pretty practical about it. Yeah. Okay.
So I'd been that way, growing up, and into youth group and everything like that. And then I was given, probably not the best situation, but I was given the opportunity to play in a lot of worship bands on stage at our church, at a lot of conferences, did some tours and stuff like that.
Wow.
And it's an amazing experience. I loved it. But the kind of like the other part of that is, if you're 16, 17, 18, and you have kids thinking that you're the most famous guitar player in the world, like, you're going to have issues with pride. Like, that's going to be a big thing. Something that I had to work through, especially in college, where I would just, my theology would just get more and more, I don't know the right word, like, it's just like tight knit. Like, everyone had to fit in this box, like, get in line, everything like that. And it wasn't until later that I really realized, I was like, what am I doing? Like, this, I'm excluding so many people from the kingdom. I think I'm the only one that should be in the kingdom, and at the same time I'm still not living by my own rules.
Yeah.
But because I have the knowledge, I know that
Yeah.
I'm gonna make it and everyone else isn't. So it really did take, some teachers in college kind of beating it out of me, and some time out of college being like, like maybe God's kingdom isn't as closed off as I think it is.
Yeah, and I relate to that a little bit of, so I didn't grow up in church like at all. I would go with my grandma a couple times a year, but when I got involved in church, I think I was a sophomore in high school, and we got involved with our youth group, and I remember like just having this radical change in my heart of like, I knew pretty early on like I was gonna, like, serving in ministry wasn't like a thing you had to talk me into, if you get what. And it sounds like you guys are kind of the same way. Like, you didn't have to convince me to show up early and help out or whatever. And I realized pretty early on how few people, at least in our youth group, were like that, and so that created an opportunity for me to kind of move up through the ranks, if you will, in church terminology, where it was like, well, this kid's at least trying. I remember the first message I ever got to preach, I think I had only known the Lord for like 6 months, 7 months, which is way too early. I was like 16 years old, but there was that effort there. And so kind of what you were talking about, I relate to that a lot. And I think a lot of our listeners do, of like, I got to this point kind of colliding the question I asked you of like, I am doing all this stuff. I am showing up early. I am staying late. I am teaching. I am leading Bible study. I am doing all this stuff. So I kind of gained this, I went from like not knowing Jesus to being like, I'm the only one who knows him, or like really knows him.
Yeah.
And I started, like you said, I kind of started outing people. I wasn't as close with my non-Christian friends anymore. My family didn't want to mess with church. I didn't want to mess with them. And I almost took this moral high ground of like, I can remember my family like going on camping trips, and I'm like, nah, I'm gonna stay so I can go to church on Sunday. Like, y'all do. And then, like, here I am now. I'm just sitting in the house alone, right? Like, and then I don't even know any of those guys that I served with. I don't know any of them anymore. And so I think a lot of people relate to both, to that God, I'm trying to serve you, and my life isn't maybe how I want it to be, or God, I am serving you, and my life is kind of how I want it to be, and so I'm kind of cool with not letting anyone else into this environment. I think people will relate to both of those. Now, when you guys met, though, I would imagine pretty early on in your relationship, you guys had that faith conversation around like what you believe and what you walk in. And obviously, you guys are married, so it seems like you got on the same page.
Right.
But what did your faith kind of, how did that look in your dating and up until now in your walk with like each other? What does that look like?
So we actually, when we actually it was before we started dating, I went to the first service of the church plant that she came to.
Okay.
So there was always, and then I ended up leading worship at that church and stuff like that. So it was always an integral part of our relationship. The church that she was serving at, that we were serving at the church plant. And it was always a topic of conversation that we brought up.
Yeah.
I think it's funny. I can remember a conversation with, I believe it was with you and Laura, sister-in-law, where she was like, "Oh, you probably wouldn't have liked Alex like a few years ago." Like, yeah, probably because I was a jerk.
Right.
And
well,
go ahead.
I think that so I moved to Nashville to help start a church.
Okay.
That's why I moved here. I knew the pastors, and we met 3 months after I moved here. So it was, ministry was my whole life. I uprooted my whole life to move here to start a church, and I didn't know anyone coming into it other than the pastors. And so whenever I did move here, and my whole life was revolving around church, obviously when I'm looking to date someone, I want them to be a Christian.
For sure.
So of course, when I hear, my roommate knows you do ministry to an extent.
Right.
That was really important to me, because I'd always, growing up, whenever you grow up in church, you're like, oh, like, I want to marry a pastor. Like, I want to marry a worship leader. Like, I always was like, oh, I'm going to be a pastor's wife. Like, I just had that. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, no, I think I'm going to do ministry. So whenever we did meet and we started going on dates, faith was really easy for us to talk about, because he had just graduated college with a degree in ministry. Okay. I had just moved here to start a church. So it was really easy for us to start having those conversations. Yeah. And I do remember talking with our sister-in-law. And I remember we had had a long car ride to Memphis. It was like 2 hours, and we talked about religion like the whole time. And I was just asking him random questions, and I don't even remember what topic we got stuck on, but we got there, and he had mentioned to like his parents and family, like, oh, we'd been talking about this topic, and they're like, oh, we're so sorry, like he bored you for that long about this thing. And I was like, no, I'm actually like really, I was like, I'm actually really interested in it. Like I asked him to have this conversation.
You still do it to this day. You still ask questions in the car, and it'll last for
and that's a great
hours.
part of our relationship. Is I always tell people that Alex is my brain. He is incredibly smart, and he did go to school where I just went to like a 2-year ministry school and kind of was like an intern and volunteered. He went through like intense schooling and training, so he has like a wealth of knowledge, which is great for me when I'm reading something and I'm like, can you explain to me why this is written like this? Or, you know, he's studied Greek and Hebrew, and I have never done that, so it's great to have him, and it helps build our relationship and our relationship with God whenever I can just kind of ask him. He's like my Google of like, can you explain
your
this
Google,
to me?
your personal
Google.
Google.
My personal Google of
that's so cool,
religion and ministry stuff is right here. So
you graduated from Belmont, right?
Yep.
Or was it Lipscomb? No, it was Belmont.
Belmont.
With a degree in ministry.
Yep.
But I know you guys, they don't. You don't do that now. You do something totally different.
No.
Kind of walk us through briefly how did you land? How did you go from I'm going to marry a pastor, I'm going to be this Bible theologian, whatever, worship guy, all in one, and then where you landed now? How do we get there?
Yeah. So
what do you do now first, so they know?
So I work in IT right now.
Okay.
So my official title is lead infrastructure engineer. That doesn't mean anything.
That sounds fancy.
It sounds fancy.
All three of those words independently are fancy.
Right.
When you put them together, it's even fancier.
Yeah. I write code. That's all I do. But so what ended up happening was it was the last semester of college. I was going to graduate with a ministry degree. And I was in 2 interview processes at the same time. I was in an interview process at the last round to be the worship leader of a church out in Indiana. Okay. And then I was also at the end of an interview process for being a SQL database administrator, which back up a little bit. I'd taken some IT classes in college, liked it. I was good at it. Ended up taking, I don't remember what the class was called, but it was basically a class, designed around business systems, like technology that a lot of businesses will use in terms of like SQL, which is where you keep like all these tables of all this data and everything like that. And my professor was like, why do you have a 99% in this class and you're a ministry major? Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And he used that as like, oh, I'm going to refer you to these companies. That led to an interview. So I got to the end of both these interviews. I got an offer from the job in IT. And then I was one interview away. They were going to fly me out to Indiana for the last round of interviews. And it honestly came down to, I wanted to stay in Nashville, and the amount of money that I would be getting as the lowest level IT person at this company was what I thought my max was going to be as a worship leader. So I was like, give it 2 years, give it a shot, see what happens. For sure. Fell in love with it.
And I love that too. I love how honest you are about that, because I think so many of us, y'all seeing it probably just as much as anyone else growing up in that church and youth culture, it's so mind-boggling to me how churches, even now, post-COVID, will throw out a $15,000 a year salary and be like, huh? Like, here we go.
This
and
is
it's
a
like,
nice
this is massively under-competitive right now.
Exactly.
I was, me and Amanda were youth pastors at our previous church. Our audience knows this, but we both worked full-time jobs for that exact reason. And we tried to like juggle both. And it just became so exhausting that we just had to choose. And it was like, you know what? I'm miserable doing both, but one quite literally only pays me like $500 a month.
Yeah.
And this one pays me $500 a week. So like, but I remember feeling this tension of like, do I love God if I walk away from this? And it's like, well, I think God also, like Paul writes in Corinthians, like, don't be so generous that you harm yourself, you know? And I think a lot of our audience can relate to that aspect of like, God, I really love you, but I mean, I can't just work at the church for free all day, every day. Or like, you know, if you're thinking about getting married, starting a family, those kind of things, like you gotta pay for that stuff. And y'all met post-COVID, so y'all live in the expensive world. You know, we were lucky enough to get married pre-COVID, but yeah, no. So you land in IT. You moved to Nashville to help be a part of this church. That's kind of where you guys were at, wedding day time, all of that.
Yep.
And you're kind of in the same boats now, or similar boats, I would say.
Yeah.
But for our audience, they don't know this. It's kind of the reason we agreed to even do this episode. Walk us through kind of your big event that we kind of said beforehand. This is what we were going to talk about. Walk us through, like, so you're married, all's well in the world. What happens?
So this actually all started when we were still dating.
Oh, okay.
So
I didn't even know that. Okay.
Yeah. So this happened when we started dating.
It was about a year into us dating.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a long story. There's a lot of stuff, but to keep it semi-brief in this part, I was leading worship at the church that Kat was at. I would be singing, and I would have what seemed like a mini seizure that lasted for about 1 or 2 seconds. And what would happen was I would lose control of my limbs. I would lose control. I couldn't sing, but very, very short. So I could like make it through a set, whatever. Mm-hmm. After several doctor's appointments, several tests, blood tests, MRIs, spinal tap, everything like that, the neurologist said, well, we have absolutely no idea what's going on with you right now. Mm-hmm. But based on these MRIs, you have multiple sclerosis. And we need to get you on medication right now because this thing's going to spread. And so that's kind of where we ended up. And then I was on medication. We were still dating, just trying to figure out how to navigate all of this, and me trying to figure out, okay, well, I still have this issue that no one seemed to solve, and then I have this new problem that I have to deal with. I don't even know what MS is at the point. Like, I just know I have it, and I have to give myself a shot once a month. And I don't even know what to do at that point. It's just completely puzzling and confusing, and not to mention that I was dating Kat, and Kat also didn't know what MS was or anything like that. So we're both just like, we don't know what the heck's going on.
When you found out, walk us through, if you don't mind, walk us through that day and then maybe the next few days after as that. Because like you said, like when you're first told, you kind of don't even really know, I would imagine, you don't even really know what to do with it. It's like someone just told you a fact and you're like, okay, whatever that means, you know? Walk us through kind of that day and the days after. How that felt and what you did.
So leading up to that day, I had gone through several MRIs, had a spinal tap, everything like that. First 2 MRIs came back and they were like, you don't have MS. Great. Like you're fine, whatever. And then a different doctor was like, I want to do another test. And I never knew I didn't know what the results were going to be. And he just was like, I need to call you today. And he called me and was like, you've got MS. This shot's going to stop it. That you need to be on this shot right now.
So real quick, before you go any further, I'm sorry, I should have asked this earlier. For those maybe who don't know, in super normal non-IT coding terms, what is MS? What is it?
Yeah, so the term means many scars. And so basically what it is I have scars on my brain and my spine.
Okay.
And those scars, if they build up over time, you can get like many scars in like a single place. Then you start to lose the ability to move limbs. You start to lose ability to do certain things in certain parts of your body because the nerves can't communicate.
Right.
So it's really trying to stop your body, which it's your immune system causing the problem.
Yeah.
Stop your body from causing those scars to happen. If you can stop it, or if you can slow it down enough, then there's a good chance you're not going to have any major issues.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's not uncommon. I was incredibly lucky. They found 3 scars on my body. I know many people that the first time they got diagnosed, there were hundreds.
Wow.
And because they were starting to get symptoms like, oh, I just lost the ability to walk for 5 minutes. And so it was those different types of things. So it was a huge blessing that they found it when they did, because there was no reason for me to have gone other than whatever this other thing was that they still couldn't figure out.
So you get the news, you kind of go home, I'm sure you Google, you start trying to figure out, like, what does this mean? Like, what is it?
Yeah.
Once that kind of reality started to set in, like, internally, what were you thinking? Who were some of the first people you told? Yeah. Kind of walk us through that a little bit.
So even from an initial Google search, they don't tell you what it did to you. It was very much like, okay, multiple sclerosis, many scars, has to do with nerves, brain, spine, whatever.
Right.
And so I was like, whatever, it's fine. They're going to put me on a shot. Doctor says I'll be fine. I'm going to be fine. Immediately told my parents, and both of them basically broke down in tears because they knew people that had MS that are not walking, that have to have assistance, that cannot do anything. So they were like, my kid has MS. He can't walk. He's not going to be able to walk. But even like when I talked to Kat about it, I mean, Kat didn't know. I didn't know. I knew what the concept was, but I didn't know
Right.
what the end goal, or not the end goal, but what the outcome was going to be.
Yeah.
And so we were both like, all right, I'm on the medicine. They said that this is going to stop it. I guess that's just what we're going to do right now. Like, we always said like, it wasn't necessarily cancer. It wasn't aggressive cancer. It wasn't anything like that. So we were just like, we're just going to roll. We're just going to see what happens.
So what do, I guess from that day kind of till now, you said like, okay, you would have these like 1 to 2 second like kind of lapses or seizures, if you will. Like, what are those symptoms? Did they get worse? Did they get better? Or are they kind of staying the same? Like, what does that look like?
And this is the blessing and the stupid thing. So we did figure out what that was, what those many seizures were. I was having a reaction to fish oil that only like a small percentage of the population has.
Interesting.
Where it was dropping my blood pressure suddenly.
That's
but no one
super
could ever
random.
find it. No one figured it out. It was so random. So finding MS was a huge blessing that came out of nowhere from trying to find something on an MRI that was just a side effect of a supplement I was taking.
Yeah.
You know, it was, I don't know how to explain it as much as it was just, even from the start, even from the diagnosis, in my brain, it was, this is gonna be hard, but this is probably the biggest blessing I could have gotten. You know, getting accidentally finding a chronic illness that could cause you to lose the ability to like use your limbs, and they just found it out of the blue, where it was enough where they were even questioning, is this MS, because it just barely started.
Yeah, what an interesting perspective too to view it that way, because I know so many people would be so quick to throw the self-pity party of like, woe is me. You know, we talked about this earlier kind of with your upbringing, but the same with like, I'm doing all this stuff. Kind of almost like, God, why me? Did you deal with any of that at all?
I did, because there was always the times that was, you know, what if the medicine doesn't work? You know, It hasn't worked for some people. What if it doesn't work? What if it keeps going? What if I can't walk? You know, what do I do with this? And then also the side effects of my medication. Like, I'm losing 60% of my energy on a daily basis. I can't hang out with friends. I can't do anything besides go to a job. Like, how do I deal with that? And, you know, I kept thinking about this, even leading up to this interview. And I was like, you know, I don't know if the right question a lot of times is, did God cause this, as much as what is God bringing from it? Yeah. And what he brought from it was the biggest change and the biggest improvements in my life, despite
how so
hardships.
When you say that, like, what are some examples, if you don't mind sharing? Like, what do you mean by that?
I'll start with the low level. Exercise and eating better. Those are literally all they tell you. They're like, get on medication for MS, eat good, exercise. That's all you can do. Yeah. Completely cured my anxiety, completely cured my depression, completely gave me a bunch of my energy back. You know, it brought me back to a semi-normal place. Yeah. All things like the depression, the anxiety were things that I'd struggled with for years. And all of a sudden it was all gone because I did what doctors have been telling everyone to do forever.
Yeah. It's crazy, right? Drink water, eat vegetables, work out a little bit.
Exactly. Yeah. And then from, I think, a bigger perspective, spiritually, it made me realize how much bigger God is, in terms of, I'm looking at this awful illness and all of the issues that it could bring about, and yet for some reason God's bringing good things from it. And I don't really get that. I don't understand why that is. You know, if God is this good God, why did he give me this illness? And at the same time, if I hadn't gotten this illness, I would be worse off than I am today. Yeah. So it's weird to see this mystery that is God, that he really does bring good out of bad situations, but at the same time, he's just bigger and beyond all of it. Yeah. And it grew. It took God out of the box for me. It really showed me that there's a reason why people say, oh, well, it's, not a religion, it's a relationship. And I feel like that saying can get weird and
Yeah.
dumb sometimes.
Yeah.
But the more I've even thought about it, the more I'm like, the characteristics that we give God are not big enough to contain him. Like, he is a person because he has, the characteristics have so many idiosyncrasies. To get to know him is something that is a bigger endeavor than just reading about him in a book.
Yeah.
It's a relationship, not because you need to ignore the Bible, but because the Bible is pointing you to these huge concepts and characteristics that is God, that ultimately just ends up being mystery.
Yeah.
And it's the best relationship because everything is something to be learned. And
Yeah.
you can never learn enough about a characteristic because the idiosyncrasies that come with it that are God
Yeah.
are the coolest things to be able to find out.
Yeah. Well, that sounds beautiful. You said idiosyncrasy twice, and I'll have to Google that one afterwards. I get what you're talking. I see it now, right? But no, and kind of shifting over to you for a second, Kat. So he tells you, you guys are dating.
Yeah.
Were you guys engaged at the time, or were you
No,
still
we're just
just
dating.
dating?
We were dating.
So what is that? How does that unfold for you? Because like you shared earlier a little bit about like this is your first serious relationship, like dating a year now, things are kind of really on the up and up, and then this happens. Like, walk us through kind of how that felt for you.
Yeah, so it was very interesting because it was my first relationship. I was like, okay, how do I handle this well? And how do I was just thinking, like, how am I going to be like the best girlfriend I can possibly be through
Right.
this time? Like,
Right.
and even then I was like, everything was great. And I obviously was head over heels, but I was like, what if I wasn't? Like, I couldn't even break up with him if I wanted to, because now he's getting sick and like that
Yeah.
wouldn't be nice.
No
It
one
wouldn't
could be that
fair.
girl. Yeah.
Right. Like, I have to be even more nice now and even more kind because he's going through these things. But in all of that, it was an interesting time. And his parents were around a lot more. So it was interesting, like, getting to know his parents. I mean, we're
Yeah.
a year in, and again, I'd never been in a relationship. So I didn't even know really how to have a relationship with a significant other's parents. And I have to think, I didn't really grow up with great parents. So I didn't
Yeah.
even, I talked to my mom once every couple of months, and he talks to his mom every day.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was also a very hard thing to try to get used to for me, because I was like, oh, he does have a great relationship with his parents, and COVID had just happened. So when he's going to doctor's appointments, it's either there's no one can go in with him or one person can, and his parents are obviously worried, so his mom's in town a lot, so he's taking his mom with him. So it was already creating a little bit of tension for me of just being like, oh, like, his mom is like more important to me, more important
Yeah.
than me at the time, which, I mean, we'd only been dating a year. Like,
Yeah,
yes,
that's
his mom's
kind of
important.
fair. Yeah, a little bit.
Yes, but at the same time, I was like, this sucks. Like, I can't
Yeah.
even be there for him if I wanted to be there for him.
Yeah.
So it was a hard time to just navigate a relationship early on, but
Yeah.
I think it really did strengthen us a lot. And I think it did kind of move us ahead of what a normal relationship may look like.
Yeah.
And I remember I was actually on a road trip with my best friend at the time whenever he got diagnosed. So he calls me, and I'm like 4 hours away because we had literally left the night before. He calls me, and he's like, I have MS. And I was like, you were literally just told like a week ago that you didn't.
Yeah.
And now all
Yeah.
of the sudden you're getting told that you do. And then there was a part of me that was like, I just started this week and a half long road trip, but I'm only 4 hours away. Do I like turn around? Do I go
Yeah.
back?
Yeah. What do you do? Yeah.
Do you need me? Do you not need me? And also,
Yeah.
we had no idea what it was. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like, it's not that big of a deal. Like, to me, I was like, he was told, this isn't going to kill you. Like, even at its worst, you may not be able to function, but like,
Yeah.
you're not going to die. Like, you're not
Yeah,
going to die tomorrow.
exactly.
So I was like,
Yeah.
I don't need to like rush back to be by your side.
Yeah.
And so it kind of didn't feel, whenever he first got diagnosed, it was like, okay.
Yeah.
And it was like, what do we do from here? Like, how do we just keep going? And I never questioned like, oh, should I leave him because he's sick? Like, that
No,
never
for
even
sure.
really crossed my mind, especially because in the moment it didn't seem like that big of a deal.
Yeah.
And we were told, the doctor said, take a shot once a month, you'll be fine the rest of your life. And I was
Exactly.
like, great, easy enough.
Yeah.
And it'll just be part of our lives. And at the time, didn't think anything of it. Of course, moving on as we got married and stuff, like, things did pop up, and there have been times where him having MS has been hard for us, but at the time when we were dating, it really didn't
Yeah.
affect us
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
Do you feel like this is for you, Kat? Do you feel like there was ever a moment, maybe, and if this is too much, just tell me, we'll back off. But
No.
and I promise I'm going to try really hard not to cry when
No,
I
no,
ask
no.
this, because I imagine this through the lens of a partner, and you guys are probably the same way. I would rather it be me than my wife, get sick. I'm sure you could probably relate to that too. Of like, at least it wasn't someone I love. But for you on the other side, have there ever been days where it's been emotionally heavy on you, Kat, and there's maybe a hesitancy to want to bring that, like you don't want to make more on him than what's already there? How do you kind of navigate, if that even is a thing? How do you navigate that? What does that look like sometimes?
Yeah, I think when we first got married, it was really hard because one of the side effects and things that Alex does struggle with is something called MS fatigue, where he just gets extremely tired, where it's like he can't get up and do anything. He can't go, like after work, he's not going to want to go grab dinner somewhere. Where for me, I love being out of the house. I love going to do stuff. I love hanging out with my friends. I love going to coffee shops, going out for dinner. And like, we live in Nashville. There's so many things to do, so many places to go, people to see. So when we get married and I'm like, all right, you want to go do something? He's like, no, like I can't.
Yeah.
That was extremely hard on us when we first got married, because it created a tension of like, well, all of our other married couple friends are going out together. They're all going out and hanging out. And then if I want to go, I'm going without you.
Exactly.
So it almost felt like there was a divide in our relationship right when we get married, because it was like, I'm going out with our friends without you because you're too tired to come. And on paper, that sounds like, oh, just like get over it. Like if you're tired, just power through it and like you'll be fine. Just have an energy drink. Just come with us. And it was really hard for me to understand that like him being tired wasn't just, oh, he didn't get enough sleep. It was his body was completely shutting down and he can't even stand, let alone go have conversations and hang out with people. And so that was really, really hard on us, because I was like, just get up. Like, why? Like, you're acting like this is the end of the world. And like, I really just didn't understand it. So for me, it was really hard. And I felt kind of alone in that first couple of months of us being married, just because I was like, he's at home, I'm not. And it was just a weird tension that we have worked out, obviously.
Yeah, I hope
and
so.
We've learned, we've learned a lot in the last, couple of years of being married. But at first it did suck. It felt like almost like we weren't getting to do normal things as a newly young married couple.
Yeah. And I'm sure there's two emotions, right? There's anger of like you said, just get over it. Like drink a Red Bull and move on. And then the other side is probably like any argument or any sense of anger like that. On the other side, then there's that, maybe that guilt a little bit of like, he can't help it, you know? And I think that feeling is where our relationships grow, right? It's super normal to feel like you felt and be like, well, why can't we go do the things that I want to go do, regardless of like medical reasons or not? And then maybe you do pop off or you snap off or you're like, okay, I'm going to go by myself. And then on the drive downtown, you're just thinking like, I'm the world's worst person right now, you know? And I'll kind of shift this back to you for a second. On the other side of that, she does go out and now you're at home.
Yep.
What does that look like for you? How do you handle that? How does that feel?
I think it was hard at first, because, so you want to go, I get that she wants to go out and have fun, but like, you're going to leave me behind. But at the same time, I'm like, I'm not going with, so I'm kind of the reason why, you know? So it was always kind of a different situation. I think over time we have gotten so much better at, we're married, we love each other. Sometimes we do different things, and that's okay.
Yes.
Sometimes she's going out with her friends, I'm staying home and I'm reading a book. It's these different types of things where in my mind I know that if I went out with her a lot of times, I had a hard day at work. I know that when I'm out there, I'm going to be silent because I have a hard time speaking, let alone moving. I'm too tired. So over time, we've just gotten really good at she's gotten really good at understanding, this is what Alex looks like when he's done.
Yeah.
And at the same time, both of us being like, it's okay if we go do our separate things for a little while. That's not a big deal. At the end of the day, we're at the same house. We're going to sleep in the same bed. It's still still everything's great, everything's perfect.
Yeah.
But it was it definitely was not like that at the beginning.
Yeah.
And there's a balance to it where it's not, I'm not going out every night.
No,
And he's
for
not
sure,
staying
for
home
sure,
every night.
for
There's
sure.
definitely a balance where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
on the weekends, one night I'm going out with my friends and he's not going to come, and that's okay. And it has helped us build a healthy relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of times, especially whenever, COVID was happening, it was very easy to be just very, very codependent on your significant other and just think, I have to spend, I get like wanting to as well, spending 24/7 with this person. Like, I'm not going to go anywhere without them. And if that means we're staying home all the time, we're staying home all the time. And for us, that's just not how our relationship works.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're completely okay with being separate sometimes, doing our own things, and then coming together. And I think that's healthy.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think especially for people maybe who have that similar upbringing and relationship story that y'all shared earlier, like I see so many young Christian couples, they graduate high school, they get married super young, and then the thought of doing anything without each other just feels like blasphemous. And it's like, and me and Amanda kind of went through that phase very early in our marriage. But what we found was like, I feel like we fought more when we didn't get away from each other from time to time. And for our audience, like you guys don't know Kat like we do. Like when she says go out, we're not going like night clubbing and like all this
Not all
crazy
the
stuff, right? But like even something as simple as like Amanda goes to the Bible study once a week now. And every Monday, I always give her a hard time and try and guilt trip her into staying. Mainly because that means I have to deal with our 1-year-old by myself, and I'm too tired from work, and I don't even have MS. But I'm too tired. But even that has created just that distance. Makes you kind of long for someone to come back, and so totally nothing to do with kind of what we were just sharing, other than to say like it is good, I think, for couples to have those times away from each other. You don't have to be around each other all the time, and I think you'll see your relationship thrive kind of when you do that. So we talked a lot about that day and kind of the earlier days as y'all learn to navigate this new season. Fast forward to now, kind of where we at. Give the audience an update on where we're at now. What is that? You said you were doing a shot a month to hopefully keep it at bay. I did just a very slight Googling. I watched 2 TED Talks on MS so that I kind of maybe knew a little bit. And one of the things that they said, though, is that it isn't something that's just totally curable.
Correct.
Like there's not just going to be a day where you wake up and it's short of Jesus healing you, where it's just magically like, oh, the shot finally worked or whatever. Yeah. So what is kind of daily life look like as far as you talked about being tired, but are there other symptoms? Has it spread more? Has it not? Kind of what does that look like now?
Yeah. So it has not spread. Praise the Lord.
Wow. Okay.
It's been 2 years, 3 years, something like that. Has not no changes.
So
whatsoever.
The shot seems to be working.
The shot's working. So it is not curable in the sense that it's going to progress regardless.
Right.
All the shot does is there's a lot of science behind it. It just stops it, or it slows it down significantly.
Okay.
So an example would be if I somehow manage to live to 300 years old, yeah, I might lose the ability to walk, but I'm not going to live to 300 years old. It's slowing it down so much that I'm going to be fine for the rest of my life.
Wow. Okay.
So yeah, it's just like a shot comes to my door once a month. I give it to myself, and that's it. It's not a big deal, and it's like an EpiPen, so it's super easy. It's not like a huge needle or anything. It's super easy. I think a big thing. This is fairly recent, and I talked about it a little bit before. Us just eating better and exercising has brought my energy to a completely different place than where it was before. So as how it was before was, I use this stupid example for everything. So everyone starts the day with a gas tank, and your gas tank is at 90-100% depending on how well you slept. You go through your day, you work, you walk the dog, you go to the gym, whatever. You're tired at the end of the day. Your fuel's at 40%. You sleep, you start over again, you're fine.
Right.
For me with MS, and for most people who have MS, you don't start at 100%. You never start at 100%. You don't start at 90, you don't start at 80, you start at 60. And stupid example, there is a hole in your gas tank. So you are losing gas faster than everybody else.
Yeah.
When you hit 0, that's when MS fatigue starts. And if you hit that point, you're down for 8 hours. You're not sleeping. You're not doing anything. You're probably staring at a TV or staring at a wall for 8 hours.
Yeah.
That was something that learning to manage my energy has gotten way better over time. Because at first it was like I was hitting this every day, like every time. Like that's why most of the time I never went out with Kat, because I was like, I hit this thing every single day. Partially because of work, partially because I just didn't know what to do with my energy.
Yeah.
Partially due with not being physically fit, eating right, that kind of thing. But thank the Lord that now, between me having time with it, learning better energy management, eating right, having good exercise. I mean, it's not where I was before I got diagnosed, but I'm like at 80% and I don't have a hole in my gas tank anymore. It's we can live our life. We can. It's not a matter of, oh, Kat wants to go on a date. Well, I'm never going on a date for months because I'm tired every single time. Right. Now to being like, well, I could go on a couple this week, and I'm totally fine.
Which that's got to be great now.
Yes. No, it's very exciting.
Yeah. It's been a weird journey, and it's very unexpected. A whole lot of random medications that I've tried. A whole lot of bad combinations of being. I was making a joke with Kat, so. No one try this. No one try this. This is not healthy.
Okay.
So I would be given a medication for energy. It was called modafinil. Very, very similar to Adderall, just not addictive. It would like boost my energy level by like 20%. Help me out a little bit.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, here's an idea. This increases my energy a little bit. So does Monster energy drinks. What if I put them together? That's a great
double
idea.
Boost.
Yeah, double boost. Yeah. And I did that a couple of times. It got me to like 60, 70%. I could like make it work. Then you realize that it's very bad and that could cause a lot of health issues.
Jump starting your heart and everything else.
Yeah. There is one time where we were, I was very much like still tired. I was like around 40, 50%. I had modafinil and Monster in my system. And MS fatigue is very odd, where it's not something that wanes over time for me. It's like it hits a point and it's just gone. It just disappears. You get all your energy back. Mm-hmm. So we were at like a party. It was like for a pastor. You like had some board games or something like that. And I jumped from like MS fatigue wore off. I was at like 40%. I jumped to probably 200%.
Man.
And so you know me, I'm not a competitive person. I don't get mad. I'm pretty chill most of the time. And I was yelling. I was competitive.
Okay.
And it was, it wasn't the best. So I hadn't done that since, but there's it's good that I don't even need those medicines anymore. Like I'm very much living a semi-normal life.
That's awesome.
And my wife and I are able to go out, have fun, everything like that, and there isn't any major issues.
So going back in, that's such great news and I think for everybody listening, like that gives the weight off their shoulders of like, okay, great, he's not dying right in front of our eyes, but for going back, kind of tying back what we were talking about earlier for just a minute, what is serving and you could say working in the church or serving in the church, what did that look like in that time? So you were leading worship, playing, you started to have your seizures, then you had your diagnosis. Fast forward to today, you're still part of our church, or you guys are both part of our church, but like you do, you were doing the social media stuff and our photos and videos, and you play on the worship team from time to time. But what did that look like through the course of that whole story that you just shared?
Yeah, so as soon as I got diagnosed, I did a hard stop. Hard stop on worship. Still went to church, but just hard stop. I was like, I can't serve right now. Yeah. I'm trying to figuring out energy at that point, trying to figure out all this sort of stuff. Took a huge step back, trying to figure out my relationship with God at that point as well. And then when I got back into it, it was still very, very difficult. My energy was still not figured out. Taking medications here and there to try to get my energy up. It wasn't really working. So yeah, it was just hard, like what do I do when I feel led to serve on a Sunday and yet how much energy I use in service puts me out of commission for Monday and Tuesday. You know, that's not it's not easy.
Yeah.
So once again, it's gotten a lot better recently. I've been able to play a lot more. Everything's been a lot better. But back then, no, it probably it would have been better if I stepped off of serving and just went to church for a while.
Yeah.
But it was definitely, it was a hard season. And just to think, like, it was hard for Kat to understand with all the energy things. Imagine other church members.
No, for
imagine
sure.
other people you're volunteering with.
Yeah,
Like,
and I would imagine there's a piece of you that doesn't want to just go around with like a sweater that says I have MS. Like
100%.
anytime anyone asks
100%.
what's going on, you're like, oh, well, here's all this stuff going on.
Exactly.
So you better just fly under the radar.
Yeah.
And I would imagine, so kind of as you learned how to keep that energy up and kind of find that balance in your life again, did serving kind of just start to flow back in naturally over time? Or was it like you just made the decision one day, like, I'm going to do this?
No, it definitely came. It was more prevalent as time went on. I started to serve more in different areas very consistently. But yeah, at first, especially, like I said, it was wearing me out completely still when I got in right after I got diagnosed and after I took my break. And it was still super hard. But, you know, growing up in church, not saying this is a good thing, but it's real. If you've been in church for a while, serving in church, yes, it's something you feel called to do, but you also feel pressured to do. You know, serving in a church, a lot of times it's, especially where we were in a church plant, like, there's not that many people. I mean, trying to get someone to lead worship, there's no one else. Like, you got to figure it out. And, you know, sure, there's always like the comment. I love the comment. This is a tangent, but the comment of when a pastor walks up to the worship leader being like, oh, like, you know, if you can't make it, we'll just like play music over the loudspeakers. Like, it'll be fine. We'll still worship God. And I'm like, every single time I just want to be like, do it. See what happens. It's not going to be good. But anyways, other than that tangent, it was hard to figure it out. It was hard to have that conviction of being like, well, I need to serve. This is a small church. They need help. Yeah. And being like, well, if I serve, I have a hard time supporting my wife because I have a hard time working, you know? And so learning, is that a balance? Do I pick a priority that is serving my wife over service in the church, which is what I did for a while. Yeah. It's just weird.
Which is what you should do. I think anyone who's read the New Testament, like, it's very evident. Like Paul talks about, how are you going to lead this house if you can't take care of your own?
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah.
And I would imagine, kind of shifting back to you for a second, Kat. So he talked about, like, he had a hard stop. Did your kind of service ever really shift? Because I know you guys were dating.
Yeah.
Did it kind of just stay consistent through the whole story?
Yeah, it did. Like you said, it was a very small church plant. There really wasn't a lot of us doing much, and I was running social media, I was doing videos, photos, everything, and so for me, I was like, this is my whole life. Like, I'm not just gonna, just because he can't do it right now doesn't mean that I can't. So that was also kind of hard too. Again, growing up in church, you're told, like, serve, even if you're sick, like, you're serving. And so it was hard for me to just look at him and be like, all right, like, you're not going to be there, but I have to go. Like, I have to be there 2 hours early. I'm here 2 hours late, setting everything up, tearing everything down. But like you're not going to be there. And it was a little hard, especially at first, not knowing like everything he was actually going through, to not be like, why are you not still serving? Like, it doesn't make, like, I feel like you should be serving more now, because you should be like praying more.
You need
and
to get closer to Jesus.
Get on his good side, or like, come on, like, you got to be doing
That's
this
so
more.
funny.
Yep.
And so it was hard, but for me, like, I was like, I can't stop. Like, this is what I moved here for. This is my life. And so it definitely was a learning experience for me to also have to think about someone else for the first time. Because it always had just been me my whole life. And so having to stop and be like, oh, okay, like, in a relationship, like, there is give and take. There is a push and pull. And just because he's not at something doesn't mean I can't be there. And just because I can't be there doesn't mean he can't. And so just learning what serving in a church looks like whenever you're in a relationship.
Yeah, and I love that I want to touch on that for just a second, because we all laughed because we've all heard it. That mentality of like, why you should be pressing in more. Like you should get
Yeah.
closer to Jesus to get more healthy. Or like I'm sure you guys were taught. I in the later years of the youth group, I kind of caught onto this trend of like somehow the more I serve equates to the more I love.
Yeah.
And maybe even if we're honest, the more I serve gives me a sense of entitlement to provision or entitlement to blessing. Like, God, I'm doing this for you, so you're really going to pull through for me extra.
Yeah.
Or I know for me, and maybe you guys are the same, there was a validation that I gave myself that maybe the rest of the world or my family or my friends, I wasn't finding there. So it was like, okay, I know if I serve extra, I can pat myself on the back.
Mm-hmm.
I heard a pastor one time tell me, he said that when it comes to church, serving in the church is the only idol that you can have that people will applaud you for having.
Yeah.
I could be, and we all know guys who are obsessed with football, obsessed with sports, obsessed with traveling or like whatever their thing is. And we go, that's an idol in your life.
Yeah.
But we could just as easily turn around and go, your job at the church is an idol in your life.
Mm-hmm.
And so for a lot of our listeners, I know a lot of our listeners are kind of on that same page of like serving doesn't equate to loving, but you sometimes don't learn that until you go through something like this, like what you guys went through, what we went through with her parents, and you go, God, I don't have anything to offer you right now.
Yep.
And to feel the weight of God's love kind of rest on you of like, I almost felt like when I told God, like, I don't have anything left to give you. I don't want to preach anymore. I don't want to serve anymore. I almost felt like God was like, that's when I felt most pulled in by him. Instead of like reaching out to him, I felt like he was actually pulling me into him of like, that's cool. Like I don't need any of that anyway, you know? And so kind of shifting from that, I've only got 2 more questions here for you, unless we miss something that you guys want to go back to. You touched on it a little bit, but just for maybe our listeners who want to know, what does the future now look like? So you shared earlier, like with your medicine that you're on, but outside of just the MS, serving, marriage, life, what does the future look like for the church family? What are you guys thinking long term? Have you talked about it long term? Maybe because this is still kind of fresh-ish in a way. You know, I say anything less than 5 years is still kind of new. You know, so what does that maybe look like over the next few years for you guys?
I don't know if we don't talk about this intentionally or not, but MS it's never a part of the plan. You know, we're not going to account for it. You know, we're moving forward, and if MS decides to show up, it's going to show up, and that's fine. But that's not it. We're not stopping our plans because MS is trying to get in the way.
Well, and I think one way that it is kind of, we have talked about, and stop me if you don't want to talk about this, but the idea of having kids.
Yeah.
It's like, this is something you have, like, if we have a kid, is our kid going to have MS? Are we putting an illness on our child before they're even born? And that's something, you know, we've had to stop and think about. And for the longest time, Alex was like, we're not having kids. I'm not passing this down. And if anything, you know, we can adopt. And I'm totally for that as well. But for him, he was like, we're not having a kid from him, because he was like, I don't want to set my child up to have something and have to go through this like I'm going through.
Yeah. No, 100%. And I think it was something like, if you have MS, there's like a 33% higher chance of your family members having MS as well. So, I mean, there's been like times where my dad would go to a doctor's appointment or my brother would go to a doctor's appointment. Now they have to say, if something's weird going on, they don't know what's going on. They have to say, you know, my brother has MS. And both times they've gotten scares of the doctors being like, that's a legitimate concern. You have a much higher chance than most people. We need to check for this. And so having a kid, it's even higher, you know?
Yeah.
And so that's been in the back of my mind for a long time. And it's hard to be like, you know, we want to have a kid. We want to bring a kid into the world. Yeah. But it's hard for you not to think, I am cursing this child almost. Sure. You know, I am putting this on whoever this kid is, and knowing that I'm going to love the crap out of that kid. You know, I've just given him a chronic illness that's never going to go away. You know, it's not easy. You know. Yeah.
So do you feel like, and if this is too personal, we'll move on. But do you feel like you maybe are still leaning more that way still, of like not having one of like a biological kid, but maybe going the adopt? Do you still feel like you lean more towards that?
We've definitely talked about it. I think my fear is less than it used to be about giving my kid MS. And the reason why is that even if they had MS, if the medicine I'm taking right now, which was only invented 5 years ago, is essentially stopping it in its tracks, what is it going? They're already making new medicines called remyelinization therapies, which is designed to cure the scars on people that have MS. Like, where are we going to be however many years down the line if our kid had MS? You know, what medicines will we have at that point? If they had what I have and the medicine that I have, they would be okay. Yeah. So it's definitely opened me up more to it. I mean, still, I don't want them to have MS. Obviously.
No, for sure.
But at the same time, it is there's less worry there, because I know that regardless of if we have a kid, regardless of if the kid has if it has a disability, if it has MS, whatever it might have, it's being in a pessimistic mind like mine, you could always think like, I caused this. I ruined their life, and at the same time, you could also think, I've given them a chance at life. We're all going to have problems. We're all going to have certain issues that God has put in our life, that God has ordained to be in our life, however you want to say it. Why does that stop you from having a child? Why does that stop you from life being in the world? And if issues are going to stop you from having a child, then you should never have a child, because we live in a sinful world. So you're always going to have problems. So to us, it's more like, I feel like the kid's going to be strong enough to push through this regardless of what happens. He or she or what, they'll understand life, and they'll learn God through this.
What about, and we're totally off topic from what we started on, but
go for it.
Babies
I'm
is
down.
like my thing. I want to have like 7 kids.
Right.
I'm trying to
I'm
trying to convince Amanda we need another one right now.
Right.
Where do you kind of land on the conversation, Kat? Like, because you said you're open to anything, right? I think adoption is just as beautiful as having a kid.
Yeah.
I don't want to downplay that at all.
Yeah.
But when you talk about in the context of your relationship and the diagnosis, where do you kind of land on the whole thing?
Yeah, I have always, like, whenever I was a child and just growing up, like, I always wanted to be a mom. Like, that was a big thing for me. And it was funny, right after we got married, for both of us, that shifted, where we were like, actually, we never want kids.
Screw that.
Like, we got married and we were like,
we've got money, we're fine.
Like, one day I was just like, what if I told you, like, maybe I don't want kids? Because before we got married, we both were like, yeah, we want like 4 kids. Like, it'll be great. Yeah. We get married, and one day I'm just like, so what if, like, I told you I maybe didn't want a kid one day? And he was like, I don't either. And we were like, cool.
Done.
So from then on, it was just kind of like, we were like, no kids. But then, getting older, being together longer, we're like,
being more sentimental.
All right, maybe
so
we
bad.
do want a kid.
Yeah.
And for me, like, honestly, it never really crossed my mind, the idea of it could be passed down. I just really didn't even think about it, because we have learned to live with MS, and it's just become part of our lives that, not to downplay anything, but honestly, sometimes I forget about it. Like, we go days and, like, we don't talk
you
about
just
it.
talk
We
about
don't,
it all
we
the
don't
time.
think
Yeah,
about
yeah.
it. Like,
it's not where it used to be at all. It's not something that comes up on a daily life.
Yeah, so it's not anything that's like, it's not really that hard for us anymore, I would say. Like, it's manageable, it's livable.
No,
so
for
for me, it just, like, didn't even cross my mind with the thought of us, when we did start having the conversations again of, like, okay, maybe if we do want a kid in the future. And so whenever he did bring it up to me, it was hard to hear, because I was like, oh, like, I've always been brought up in a world where it was like, you have kids, you have multiple kids, and that's biblical, and that's what you do, and women are made to have children. So when I'm hearing, like, okay, like, we could have a kid, but it may have to be through adoption, I was just like, oh, like, that's great. And I've always also, loved the idea of adoption. I think it's a great option. But there is also that part of me that was like,
they're both beautiful, but they're different.
Yeah, like, I'm not going to be able to carry my own child, which, again, also, you just never know. Like, we could start trying to have a child and not be able to, and end up adopting, and so.
Yeah, well, and it's so funny. I'm guilty, and I haven't done it to you guys. I've been biting my tongue, or Amanda would get on to me. But I'm pro baby. I love kids. We have one. I want to have like 7 or 10 or 50. I love them. I say that we might have one more, and then I'm over it and I'm done. But we kind of, I always tell people, like, with our story around this topic of having kids, we got married at 19, and it was 2016 we got married, and we knew from the jump we were going to be at least 25. We were like, we want to go 5-6 years. We didn't have any money or anything, but we just wanted to like enjoy our early 20s and like figure our life out. And then her parents passed in 2020, and we knew we weren't going to have kids already, but then COVID and everything happened, and it was like, okay, do we slow down like another year or two? And then it was spring of 2022. I told Amanda, I said, I think God would be okay. Like, I think we'd be okay if it happened. And she was like, yeah, I don't really know. I don't really know about that. And then she went to Albania with our pastor's wife for a week to go visit some of our friends who were over there. And we had decided, that was in June, and we decided in May, like, okay, I had like just convinced her. I was like, all right, we're going to have a kid. She got pregnant in June, and I remember like there was never a moment where I had to talk myself into it. There was just a day where I kind of woke up and was like, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. And then a couple of days, a couple of months, a couple of weeks later, it was like, okay, no, I'm definitely okay with this. And so I think for a lot of people listening, they maybe find themselves where you said you kind of were and still struggle to be at sometimes of like, do I want to do this? I think the day will come where you just feel peace about whatever your decision is, but I'm pro baby. So whether you have one or adopt, you need one. Everyone needs one. But no, that's great. And then kind of the last thing I will end on this, and this will be for each of you. Kat, if you want to go first, what would you say to someone who's in your role in a similar situation? Maybe they have a spouse who has or a boyfriend at that point, and a fiance that has a diagnosis that maybe isn't ideal. And this is going to be kind of a loaded question, but they have the diagnosis, and like we just touched on with ministry, with going out, with kids, with finances, with everything, what would you say to someone who maybe finds himself where you were 2 years ago, or maybe even where you are now? What would you say to them?
I would say, I mean, the biggest thing is it's okay to ask questions. Like, when it comes to medical things and just big situations, like, no one really has answers for all of this stuff. Like, we can, we can guess, we can look stuff up, we can figure things out, but there's really not like answers to a lot of stuff. Like, even the like question of why is this happening to me? Like, you're never really going to have an answer to that, but it's okay to ask those questions, and it's okay to, ask your partner, like, how can I help? Yeah. That was a big thing for me at first. I was just like, I got scared, but I was just like, I don't want to make things worse, so I'm just going to kind of like be there, but also like, I never really asked him at first, like, what do you need from me? What do you, from, your partner, like, what do you need from me in this moment? How can I help? Like, how can I better understand what you're going through? I think that's why we had such a big issue of me not understanding him being so tired, is because I didn't ask him how tired. Like, I didn't ask him any questions about it. I was just like, stop being tired, because I only knew my way of thinking. So I think, don't be afraid to have the tough conversations. Don't be afraid to ask questions. And just remember, at the end of the day, like, when you're in a relationship, like, you're a team, and these things are hard and they're scary, and it's okay to just lean on each other, and it's okay to be emotional. You don't have to be the strongest person 24/7 either, because as someone who is a partner of someone who's sick, it's like, I can't make things about me. I can't be upset. I can't show any sort of weakness. Like, I have to be the strong person, and that's exhausting. You cannot live your entire life like that. And so it's okay to also be upset about it, and it's okay to have hurt feelings, and it's okay to be upset about it, and you can be upset about it together, and like let them in too. Like, don't put a wall up between you. Just keep talking about everything. I think that's the biggest thing we've learned is communication. Everything. We just tell each other, we talk about it, we work things out with each other. And a big question we always ask each other is just, how can I be here for you right now? Like, what do you need from me right now? If you need me to step back and take a break, I can do that. If you need me, to be strong for you right now, I can be strong for you. If you need me to cry with you, I can cry with you. We can pray together. We can do whatever.
All of which you have done.
Yeah. So I think just talk through it.
Okay. Well, Alex, good luck following that one up.
Yeah,
But
I can't.
no, for someone who's in your role in all of this, what would you say to them? And I will two-part this one. The first one will be like maybe it panned out how it did for you,
Okay.
and then also what if it doesn't? What if they're taking the shots and it isn't working like it's working for you?
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't catch it so early on, and it isn't like, oh, we might not have anything to worry about for the rest of our lives, but it's like, no, it did affect me. Kind of both of those. What would you say to them? We'll do the one in your scenario first. What would you say to them?
I think what keeps coming into my mind, it definitely applies in both situations.
Okay.
And I also will say the second one, I wish I had advice. The only advice I can give is the same that I would say for the first, which is God's bigger than your illness. It's so easy to over theologize this. Is that the right? I don't know if that's the right way.
It sounds like It sounds good.
Sure.
It sounds good. I
Yeah.
There. The best comfort I can give is that there in this, it's not a comfort. It's just the only way to go. There's not an answer. The answer is put yourself at God's feet. The mystery of God has greater things in store for whatever stage you are with an illness, with an issue. I've talked to people that are further along in MS than me. I've talked to people that have other illnesses than me. I've seen them struggle and I've seen them hurt. And yet their theology didn't save them. Their strength didn't save them. It was sitting at the feet of Jesus crying and looking up and seeing this huge, mysterious, loving God that is not walking away. He's not a far off God, he's a close God. But when you look up, it's almost you should be afraid of how much he loves you, because he's not going to walk away. He's not scared of what you've got. And if you know that God that's in front of you is more powerful and bigger than you could ever imagine, then you just need to hold on for the ride. Yeah. Because our hope is in him for everything. And when you don't have any answers, like in this situation, he's your shot. And that's the best shot that you can ever get in anything in your life.
Yeah. Man. Okay. I think that's good. I think that's a good answer, man. I know a lot of our audience, I appreciate you guys being so vulnerable. I know a lot of our audience, we shared, was that my water?
Yeah.
That's okay. We shared in an earlier episode, kind of our story with Amanda's parents and specifically with this, her dad struggled with cancer. And so I know a lot of our audience, they've reached out. They know someone or they have a loved one. I think at this day and age, we can all name someone who knows someone who maybe has some sort of medical thing going on. Mm-hmm. But what I love about you guys, and I promise I'm done asking questions, but I want to say this for our audience and to y'all. What I love about y'all is from the moment we even became in the same room with each other to getting to know each other, never once did either of you present yourself in a way that was your identity. Mm-hmm. Like as a couple or as individuals. And I think even throughout this whole story, you've been very clear on like, it is a piece of who you are. It just is what it is, but it's not the piece of who you are, and I can tell you guys in full honesty, when people talk about you when you're not around, it's not this is the MS guy and his wife who takes pictures, like that's not, you guys aren't those people. Mm-hmm. And so I think you've done a really good job of absorbing it, embracing it at a younger age. Not leaving your faith totally behind you, not making this like all you're ever going to be, but also not ignoring it and pretending like you talked about earlier, like we're just going to push through until Jesus makes us better, but like identifying like these are some things I need to change. These are some things we can adjust. And now here you are, you can talk about it. You're not shaking in your boots, terrified. You're not broken down on the floor, although I'm sure you have days like anyone else would. Mm-hmm. But, I think it's really, I say proud, like Like, it's exciting to see. And I think a lot of people are going to see this and go like, it is a part. I don't have to pretend like it doesn't exist, but it doesn't have to just be who I am.
Yeah.
One of the flaws I will say, and she would agree with me, I think one of the tragedies of Amanda's dad's story in the later years was the opposite of that. That became who he was.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of our friends now who even had the privilege of meeting him, that's all they ever got to see. And I'm grateful that you guys have learned how to do this in a way that as you continue to come across people, whether our paths stay next to each other till we're all old and gray or one of us moves on to somewhere else, I don't think anyone will ever identify you guys as that couple. And so that's really cool and exciting to see. So thank you guys, though, for sharing. I know that it's a lot of dove into your personal lives a lot, but I appreciate it. Is there anything that we didn't cover that maybe you want to add before I close this out?
I think I can think of something.
Okay, let's hear it. Go ahead.
So I think early on, this kind of is to the God relationship side of things. He was told, you don't have MS. It might be MS, you don't have MS.
Right.
So of course, at the time, we had a different pastor than we do now. And we were updating him, like, oh, it's not MS. The next Sunday, he gets on stage, he starts talking about miracles, and he's like, we have someone in the church who was diagnosed with MS who doesn't have MS anymore. And we're sitting there like,
whoa.
Oh.
That's
okay.
not what we said.
Yeah, we're like, that's not completely true, but like, we get it. Like, there was a thought it might be MS, and like, that could be a miracle that he doesn't.
It's close enough.
And then a week later, you get the call that, oh, you do have MS.
Yeah.
And then we have to turn around and be like, hey, by the way, you just announced from stage that this isn't a thing.
Yeah.
It actually is. So that also kind of created a bit of a hardship in just even looking at our relationships with God, where it was like, we were just told from the stage, like, oh, this is a miracle, you don't have it. And then all of a sudden it was like, you do have it. And it's almost like there's no miracle in this. There's no, God's not providing like we thought he was providing. And now everyone also in the church knows that, like, oh, by the way, like, this miracle wasn't a miracle. And that was very discouraging.
Yeah.
And it was hard. It was a hard conversations to have with people where it was like, oh, congratulations, like, you have this miracle. And I was like, actually, we don't.
Yeah.
And for me and, us talking about it, the miracle was how early they caught it.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah,
I think, you can look at any situation and call it a miracle, don't call it a miracle. But when you're looking on the bright side of things and you're looking at everything, we've talked about today, like everything that we have had to go through, there was so much good, even in this idea of how bad it could be. Because when you tell someone you have an illness, it's bad. But there was so much good in that. And so it was learning that, like, hey, the miracle is we caught it so early. There's medicine that's slowing it down. He's never going to be super sick. And so I think that situation, although it was unfortunate, helped build our relationship with God in this illness so quickly, because it was like we almost had to. It was either we're in or we're out at that point. Because then if, I know people who have done this where if you're not looking on, the bright side of things, and that situation could have happened to someone else, then they could look at it and be like, well, God took my miracle away, and walk away from their faith.
Yeah.
And that's so easy to do. And I completely understand that.
Yeah.
And I think that's how things really began to build for us.
Yeah.
Was that situation where we were like, we're not walking away from our relationship with God.
Yeah.
How is there good in this? And I think now it's a lot easier to look at it and find the good. But in the moment, it was kind of hard for us to say, like,
no, it sucks.
Yeah,
it's
like,
terrible.
it sucks. And this miracle is taken away from us. And now I feel like we can look back, 2, 3, 4 years out and say, no, there was a miracle in it. It just wasn't how it looked.
Yeah. And that's so interesting. We've never shared this on the podcast before just because it's never come up. But Amanda's dad actually had got cancer twice. Kind of similar thing. He got it the first time. The whole church was like, we're going to pray for him. And then he I want to say God healed him, but he had a surgery and had it cut out. Mm-hmm. His tumor wasn't in his lung. It was actually behind his lung. So it was really, really difficult to get to. But he was cancer-free for like 2 years. And everyone was like, oh, this is a miracle. So when it came back, the second time around, it was almost like it was an inconvenience the second time. Mm-hmm. Like it was, and I even remember like people having the energy, and I didn't know him when he got it, the second time I came along later in life, but hearing the stories of people almost being like, it was almost like karma for him. Like people thought it was something he did, you know, that's like, oh, now you've got it. But to go back to what you're saying about like kind of having that taken away from you, I know Amanda was 10, and so her dad gets sick at 10 or at 8, he's magically healed at 10, and then at 11 and a half, 12, it's back again, you know? And it never, I don't know, she'll share more, I'm sure, on like how that affected her faith, but I know for a lot of us, it felt very like I almost didn't want to tell people that it was back. Yeah. You know, and like I said, I wasn't there for that, but like hearing those people who I was around when people who left the church, we would run into them and they're like, "Hey, I heard your dad, you know, is doing better." And it's like, well, he was for a little while. And so, yeah, just that it became so internal at that point, right? Yeah. Like the celebration of it is now over. Yeah. People think you're better. And if you're not better, like I can only celebrate this once, right. You know, exactly. I can't go down the road with you twice. Yeah. And for you guys, it's unfortunate that happened to you like right out of the gate.
Yeah. And it was like, you know, you don't want to, I felt bad almost telling people and even telling our pastor, because it's like, I don't want to take that away from them either. Yeah. You know, we're celebrating this thing as a church. We have this miracle in our little startup church. And it's like, just kidding. No, we don't. Yeah. No, for and it's like, I almost felt bad for them because I want people to see miracles. I want them to have that faith, and to then be like, that's just not true, was really hard, because I was like, I don't want to take that away from people, because that could be such a foundational thing for some people. Like, we prayed for someone in our church and they're healed, and then a week later huge, they find out or they're not. Huge, yeah. And I felt bad. Like, I almost felt bad, like, and we shouldn't, because we're dealing with something on our own. But then I was like, I feel bad for the people in our church because we took this miracle away from them. Yeah. And that was also, you know, kind of hard to deal with.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're right.
But it's also so interesting because that also ended up being a blessing for us, because so I was originally told I did not have MS. Doctors literally put away my case file. It's like, you don't have MS, put it away, whatever. If that would have gone away, I would have kept progressing, and it would have gotten way worse. And I had a random nurse practitioner at the clinic was like, I think the doctor's wrong. I'm going to send this to get a second opinion. And it was that second opinion that allowed me to get the spinal tap that got me diagnosed.
I'm going to make this super spiritual for just a second.
Do it.
Do you think that the Holy Spirit maybe was using, because that is a hot take for a nurse to be like, I'm going to disagree with this guy or this girl who for sure probably on paper is more qualified. Mm-hmm. Do you feel like maybe the Holy Spirit was using that nurse in that moment to look out for you in maybe a way that you didn't even realize at the time?
Yeah, I'll be 100% honest. It's hard to not see God working in this entire situation, and I think that's one of the big ones. The other one is the fact that I ended up in the neurology department because I was taking fish oil. You know, there's just weird crap that I'm like, that shouldn't have happened. Like they said it was an anomaly, and like you said, just some random ass nurse practitioner was like, you're wrong. This is not an anomaly. This is a lesion.
And that doesn't happen for most people. It would have just gotten put away, and we'd find it years later. And so
the blessings that I had between my primary care that was like, I don't have any clue what's wrong with you, I'm going to send you to every single department to figure out what the heck's going on with you, to some random nurse practitioner that was like, the doctor's wrong, I need a second opinion, to the fish oil, to there was just too much. Yeah. There's too, that's the blessing in this scenario for me, which is you can't look at this and not see coincidence after coincidence after coincidence. And I don't know, there's some saying that's like 3 coincidences is no longer a coincidence or something like that, you know, like it's ordained at that point, you know. And so yes, and that nurse practitioner is my nurse for MS to this day, and he has continued to give me so many different pieces of advice that if he wouldn't have given it to me, then I wouldn't be where I am.
Have you shared any of this story with him as far as like how big of a role that played?
I have not.
That might be a cool conversation if you ever feel led to just be like, hey man, I don't know where you're at with your faith, but like this is a big,
what
this was a
happened, yeah.
huge moment in my life
Yeah.
that if you weren't there for, we don't know what would have happened.
Exactly.
You know? No, I think that's great. Well, thank you guys for being open, for being vulnerable, for letting us in to the church family life for a little bit.
Yeah.
We're excited for y'all's future. I'm excited to hear that because, like I said, we've brushed paths. We had dinner a couple weeks ago and like kind of roughly went over all this, but I intentionally said like, don't tell me, so that we can actually like. I don't want to ask questions that I already know the answer to because then I might not ask them. You know, so I'm learning all of this live with our audience. But thank you guys and. I'm just excited for y'all's future, and hopefully you guys have lots and lots of kids, whether you birth them or adopt them. The more kids, the merrier.
Yeah.
We'll see.
But thank you guys, and to our audience listening, thank you guys. We do have, so Kat, actually, you do travel for Disney now, and so I don't know if I told you this before, but we will put a link for how they can see that and get connected with you. So if anyone's traveling to the world of Disney, we went once and tried to do it on our own. And just fought a lot and we're really tired. So definitely reach out to her for that. But thank you guys again. And to our audience, we will see you guys next episode. Peace.